this is Property Matters, a weekly catch-up on the world of property, supported by Fairview International Property Consultancy and auctionproperty.co.uk. And we're live every week on YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn, and our website, propertymatterstv.co.uk. If you're watching on the website, leave us a Google review. And if you're watching in the socials, get involved in the conversation below. And if you have any topics for us, it's hello@propertymatterstv.co.uk that you'd like us to discuss. If you want to go take us on the move with you, there's a podcast version of the show available every week. And it's available on the podcast platforms that you see on the other side of the screen. So let's say hi to our property expert, Joe Joshi.
Yes, hello everybody. Hello to our viewers and listeners, and welcome to Property Matters.
So let's get into our first story. The average age of those buying a new buy-to-let property has fallen from 46.4 years of age in 2014 to 42.9 in 2023, reversing a stereotype of an ageing landlord population. According to new research from Paragon, which surveyed 500 landlords with up to 3 properties with a desire to grow, those in their 30s made up 21% of the total purchase group in 2014, but now they're up to 31% of 2020 in 2023. Those aged between 18 and 24 made up a tenth, would you believe, of buy-to-let house purchases in 2023, a rise from 6% in 2014. Landlords in their 50s made up 20% of buy-to-let purchases in 2023, a fall from 29% in 2019. And those 60 and over make up just 7% currently, down from 10% in 2014. Those aged 40 are the largest group, making up a third of buy-to-let purchases last year, which compares to 34% in 2014. The report found that around 3/4 of buy-to-let property purchases last year were made by those aged 49 or younger, compared to 6 in 10 a decade ago. That's an interesting thought, and you wouldn't have thought it, would you, Joe? I mean, not least the fact that 18 to 24-year-olds can afford a buy-to-let.
Well, I think, yes, very interesting statistics there, Paul. And the key things there to bear in mind is obviously the age factor. It's not the idea of being a buy-to-let landlord. It's about when and how that becomes acceptable. And of course, the earlier stats that showed that the ages were much higher were based on the fact that we came through a financial crisis crash in 2007 that actually kind of started to revive in 2014, 2015. And I think there was a huge enthusiasm on the buy-to-let market, primarily because the market was literally sat on its knees for almost 7 years. And an age group there were like thinking, well, actually, I've had my money stuck here, not doing a great deal. The interest rates were pretty low. And this is the time now. And the interest rates had got to that sort of lower level over that period from that huge height when the financial crashes started happening. And so therefore they decided that they wanted to get involved and invest into buy-to-let, as we call them, either hobby landlords or accidental landlords, or landlords that had the sufficient funds and thought, well, actually one way to make more money is maybe perhaps buy a property and then rent it out and create some sort of cash flow. So I think that was then. But as time has gone on, the changes in the marketplace, changes in taxation, changes in personal circumstances, and of course that forever clock called age that never goes back, goes only forward. People have thought, well, actually, it's time for me to maybe exit this because it's not easy to manage. We are talking, a lot over 10 years, nearly 15 years of time has gone by, and so therefore a new entry comes in. The reason why the younger ones come in is that the opportunity on a buy-to-let came through available through limited company operations. Now, that wasn't the case before. Before the limited company operation came in, there was also this thought about you had to own a home prior to being able to buy a buy-to-let home, whereas now that is not the case, and that's probably why the younger generation started entering into it.
So you're suggesting then, are you, that they're actually buying a buy-to-let before they've even got their own house to live in, so that then funds whatever they want to do for their own self, presumably?
Yes, so prior to the limited company operation being available, anyone that wanted to buy a buy-to-let had to be a homeowner of some sort prior. So in fact, they had some sort of history in terms of payment, in terms of being able to be creditworthy, income, etc. when the government changed the rules and gave a chance to buy to let in limited company operation, of course that's a separate entity, Paul. That's designed as a separate entity, and that allowed people to enter. Now there was a number of reasons why people did that. One was, and perhaps the younger generation got involved, is perhaps that parents had properties that they actually then theoretically sold from their own personal asset into a limited company asset and made the children directors of that, seeing that it was a way forward in the future. And then those youngsters added to that portfolio and didn't actually need to have a home owned by themselves before they could actually become a buy-to-let landlord through the limited company operation.
Paragon say that landlords who developed their portfolios around 30 years ago are either in retirement or certainly nearing retirement age. And a new breed of landlord is starting to come through. They say tenant demand, retirement planning, and house price growth are the key factors for landlords. Aspiring portfolio landlords pointed to the long-term tenant demand, retirement and house price growth as key drivers for growth for those looking to grow. It'd be interesting to see if what those figures do at the end of 2024, because we are hearing that a number of buy-to-lets are being sold because the numbers don't work anymore. But certainly by the end of last year, it was looking like the younger people, certainly those in their 30s and 40s, were realising that this may be a sensible way to plan for retirement at the very least.
I think the idea of buy-to-let has been a plan of retirement and a plan of drip income coming through on a monthly basis, and potentially a capital growth in the asset value. So they may have bought it for, as an example, 100,000, and now it may be worth 160, 170,000, maybe 200,000 pounds. So there's a capital growth, and plus they've had an income from that, paying off some of that mortgage, etc. So it was a way of having some sort of security and an added income, be it a pensional income or just a income. And that will continue. It's just that the values and the funding and the mathematics and the mechanisms have slightly changed. But I cannot see why somebody would not continue to do that. I mean, it has been known generally over the last 3, 4, 5 years that buy-to-let is the end, and we've talked about that here too, on the basis that a lot of people are doing an exodus, and the reason why those people are exiting that situation is that the cost of borrowing became unsustainable, and therefore it was easier for them to say, well, I want to get out of this because I'm now actually getting less income than amount of mortgage payments that has gone up and that is going out. And it was very difficult, and it's still difficult, to get existing tenants that have obviously got used to paying a certain amount, either to get them out, and B, either to get them to pay more money because they're not in a position to pay more money. So landlords have to make that decision and say, well, actually, I can't afford to do this. I can't afford to pay for you to stay into a property that I'm not making any money. So you serve them notice for them to leave and subsequently sell. But that doesn't mean to say that there isn't a new breed of buy-to-lets coming in, and new mechanisms coming in, and new calculations done on what they will have to rent going forward.
Approximately 60% of landlords said that the long-term demand for rental property was a key factor. I think they quoted the fact that over the next 10 years, the population's going to grow by about 10%, and they're going to need to have somewhere to live. And looking at house prices, they're probably going to have to rent a large amount of those, followed by 54% saying it was part of their retirement plan, and 47% saying it was pointing to long-term house price increases. So like you say, they get the double whammy. They get the monthly income, but they also get the capital growth. Around 40% said that their general ambition was to build a portfolio, and a third said they preferred property to other investment assets. Another third said they wanted to start a business to pass down to their children. Now that's an interesting point. Do you see that very much? People building an asset to pass down the family?
Well, as I said just a little while ago, that sometimes what parents have done is had a portfolio in their own personal name and then created a company vehicle and moved some of those assets into that company, giving not just them an income in the current state, but also future-wise leaving that asset to perhaps their children. And in a company structure, they can leave that much easily because it's a case of creating so much shareholders and directors of a company and presenting who gets what and makes life a lot bit easier upon expiry of one's time. So if someone dies, there's no argument of like what do you own and what's going to be, because if it's already put into a vehicle that tells you what your shares are and what you are likely to get, then that makes life a little bit easier. Also, from a tax point of view, I guess that would be a little bit more efficient. But so yes, there are people that are beginning to think. So sometimes these vehicles create a good opportunity, and of course, sometimes they create a bad opportunity.
36% said they would not, 36% said they would turn it into their main source of income, and 23% said it was a long-term investment, but they aim to sell the property portfolio off and therefore provide themselves, I guess, with a pension, a sizable pension if it was a portfolio, I'd imagine. But interesting that about a third only want to make it their main source of income. So that means 2/3 of people, it's a job on the side.
Fundamentally, it starts off as a job on the side, and then becomes evolved depending on their circumstances and what they add to their portfolio. So those that have one or two, yes, it's a job on the side, because they look at seeing how they can grow their capital. So let's say they had a saving of £100,000. The question again really is, what's that £100,000 returning me in a bank? And what could it return to me if I invested in a property, rented it out, and got some capital growth out of it? Of course, you have to bear in mind there are taxations, but there are taxations for savings as well. So it's just a case of working out the sums and see what works for them. So that is how it starts. But of course, if it starts to produce and takes up your time, and you have time in your hands that allows you to devote more time into the buy-to-let market, then that sort of buzz starts to get you to a point where you think, well, actually, I'm going to have more of this, and subsequently grow a portfolio. And that's what people have done. I mean, some people have portfolios of 60, 70, 80 properties in their personal name, and some now in the corporate sector have a lot more. It also became a bit of a drip operation, a bit like your man from the Pru back in the days. You may remember that, Paul.
Oh, yes.
And I certainly do. And when the bicycle clips and he come and collect his £2.50 or whatever on a weekly basis, and they call that the drip process of a pension policy. And this is really the new drip process. And as that comes along, a lot of the insurance companies and corporations have now started institutional landlords have become, because they know that this is the new man on the bike from the Pru drip process, where every month people are paying rent, they take off the cost of running it, and they're bringing in a certain amount. Now, if you had I don't know, 100,000 properties as part of your portfolio, and each month you're taking over £100 a month, for people like the Pru and so forth, that £100 a month invested in the stock market generally gives them even more, apart from the fact that they have an asset and a regular income, guaranteed regular income. So it's now become more of an interest to institutional landlords as well.
That was my first ever job, collecting the book, as they used to call it, for the Liverpool Victoria. So I used to be the chap with the bicycle clips, although it was more of a full Cortina back then. But anyway, that's another story for another day.
I have to join you on that one, because mine was with Britannica Insurance.
There you are.
And I just didn't have a bicycle clip, I have to say. Mine was a Triumph Dolomite.
Just get your flares caught in the chain. Anyway, let's go back to this story. Complex property types are growing in popularity, so landlords are expressing a desire to get into things like HMOs, houses of multiple occupation, and MUBs, or MUBs, I suppose, multi-unit blocks. For instance, around 8% of those surveys invest in HMOs at the moment, but 18% of people said that's what they want to get into in the next few years, and 14% have MUBs, but that rose to 26% of those who want to get involved in the future. And terraced housing is always an area of excitement for them, rising from 26% currently who own a terraced house for rent and 37% of those want to buy more terraced housing. So I guess that comes down to price, I suppose, really, and the fact that potentially terraced houses in certain areas are going to be the ones that are doer-uppers, and therefore they can make the most in terms of profit.
Yeah, I think it's what fits the pocket really, in order to make sure you get on the right ladder. And of course, properties perhaps in the north of England are more attractive, less to buy in the first place, perhaps produce a good return, a yield return. The only thing you have to bear in mind is that traveling time is part of your cost. And sometimes if you're traveling 3 or 4 hours to get somewhere, it can become, it could eat into the profits. Otherwise, yes, of course, terrace housing is where the system is based on a tier. And of course, they start always with a small, studio or a one-bedroom flat leading to two-bed flat onto a, two-bed or three-bed terrace and so forth upwards, going to a detached property. I can say that often the better results are your terraced houses, not your detached properties, because the detached properties are properties that are more suitable for families, and they don't always produce the best return for an investor because A, they cost more to have, and B, there is minimal lesser people who are available to afford the rental that you would require at a detached house stage. But there is more available in the terraced houses, terraced Victorian cottages, or just general terrace properties, which may range from anything from 150 to 200,000, depending where you are.
And of course, looking at these figures, it's likely that if anybody does target a detached property, they're likely to turn it into an HMO and make it into 3, 4, 5 flats, perhaps.
Perhaps if the planning permission allows and the environment allows. So again, you've got to do the calculation. It's all about the calculations. If you can get a good return on a 3-bed or 2-bed terrace and not have to do all the conversion work and then look for the return. So you might buy a detached house, go for the planning, get the change of use, do the building work, and turn it into flats. It might be an 18-month, 2-year project before you actually start to make some money out of it. And if you start doing that, then really you're not hitting the ground running. Whereas in a terrace property or a semi-detached property or a end of terrace or a flat, you are hitting the ground running because you've got that space ready to rent out straight away.
Yeah, there's one not far from here actually that I saw transform probably now 18 months ago, but I mean, it was a good year where they literally bought the semi-detached, then bought the one next door, knocked it all through, and now it's all 6 flats, and that was a good year of work. And I guess thinking about that, you've really got to have access to the skills within either yourself or within a team that you've got around you, because you're not going to really make the sums work if you're going to have to hire in all of the expertise to do a large project like that.
Well, you're going to have to hire in, and you're going to make no money if that project's taken 18 months in front of your own eyes. They made no money other than pay out, pay out, pay out until now. If that project is ready and they got 6 flats, they're beginning to start seeing some of that return. It probably won't be until 2 or 3 years before they actually see that they've actually paid off the work in the first 18 months before they start making profits. So it's a 5-year project before you start to see perhaps some fruits of the labor that's gone into it. And that's why I'm saying that those that take the big conversions on have to have deep and big pockets and an infrastructure that allows them to do that. But those that are coming into the market, always, my advice would be that you to hit the ground running, buy things that are manageable, affordable, and start to give you a return straight away.
They say that 8 in 10 say they would target a property in need of maintenance, with 44% saying they prefer properties needing minor refurbishment. 35% said that they would look at properties needing significant work. And it is interesting that the rental market is set to continue to grow, driven by projected population increases, as we said, of around 10% over the next decade. This favourable market outlook, they say, is underpinning the investment decisions of aspiring landlords. And I suppose that's one thing to think about in terms of like the long-term planning. I mean, interestingly, if your sums aren't providing you with a profit, but you're just about washing your face, is it worth sticking with it? Because presumably interest rates will settle slightly lower than they are now, or continue to go down. I'm just wondering if there's a landlord sitting there now thinking, well, I'm not making any money at this. It's a lot of effort. Is it time to sell, or should you stick it through, do you think?
Well, we've discussed it on our program here. Look at the stats. In the 50 years, house prices went back perhaps 5 times. Was the number that we recorded and sent. So my answer to that question is that you've got to stick to it because you've actually gone through the pain. You're probably about to get the gain, and if you just drop at about the point of gain, you've just not done it for any particular reason. And that already depends on personal circumstances, Paul. It's about that person's personal circumstances. They might be in a situation where they've got no choice but to sell and get out because personal circumstances have put that force upon them. But the true answer is that they've got to ride it out because if they've done 2, 3 years on it and come to a point, then they are now at a point where they're going to start to see some return. And then there's the cost of selling and getting out as well. And there's a cost of perhaps paying capital gains tax. There's a cost of paying all the legal fees for selling. All of those things have got to be added in. And then you ask yourself, has it been actually worthwhile selling? So, the truth is that it probably would be good to carry on. From a personal, selfish point of view, of course, every sale is important to us as either auctioneers or agents because that's how we make a living. We would love them all to sell because that's how it is. But if it's not priced at the right level, it's not going to sell either. Because if the owner can't afford to sell it at a certain level, then it's equally a false economy from agents' point of view because we'll take on something that we know we can't sell, and it puts everybody in this sort of doldrums position. So it is all about the calculations.
And of course, we've still got the spectre on the horizon of the Renters Reform Bill, which will be now a Labour bill as opposed to a Tory bill as was originally thought. And the suggestion is that they're going to make it even more tough than it was going to be under the Tory party. So it'll be interesting to see what that transpires as, and we don't have any detail on that as yet. So landlords are going to have to be particularly wary of what's coming down that line. And of course, the government does seem to be very hell-bent on making sure they get every last penny out of landlords.
Yes, and whether it's a Tory or a Labour policy, the reality is that both of the colours know that property market is the one that saves their rear in both times, and it's also the one that gives, and it's also the one that penalise all the time because they know they can. And so forever it will continue that way. It's just making sure that you buy at the right levels, giving yourself those things, those returns on your investment, and do the right thing. And often what happens is people buy with emotion rather than with a clear financial head. They'll buy it because it's close to them. They'll buy it because they like the look of it. They think they can do X, Y, Z with it, and so forth. But buy to let is very much an unemotional. It's a business. And it's difficult to do that. But because it is a property and it's a home, people tend to start to perhaps overspend on what they're going to do to it, leave it vacant at a time when they probably could take a lower rent, but they feel they should get more. So, it's all emotional decisions, and those emotional decisions can be very expensive.
And also, we've got the situation at the moment whereby we have another factor, which of course is licensing, and that's actually coming into fruition at the moment with new landlord licensing introduced. Private landlords in parts of South London will now need a license to legally let any property to a single family household or no more than 2 unrelated sharers. The selective licensing scheme was approved by Lambeth's Council in May in a bid to improve property conditions and management and tackle problems of antisocial behaviour and deprivation. It means landlords will need a licence and meet the conditions associated to legally let qualified properties in 4 specific parts of Lambeth. Councillor Mohammed Hashi said that Lambeth was one of the most deprived boroughs in London in terms of housing affordability, overcrowding and homelessness. Residents who can't access social housing and aren't able to purchase their own property often find that renting privately is their only option, and most landlords provide good quality, safe accommodation. But there are some who take advantage of their tenants and don't know what their responsibilities are, leaving too many people living in poor conditions or having to deal with problems caused by overcrowding. And I'm sure that is the case in some instances, but this does seem rather that they're going to basically tax the landlords to get some cash to deal with issues such as going into properties and checking that they're all going to be, of a suitable quality, and also dealing with antisocial behaviour. That's an interesting one, that, isn't it? Because if you're going to need money to deal with antisocial behaviour, then the best way to get it when you've got no money is to tax the landlords.
Yeah. An interesting point, and one that probably is going to get an answer that you're probably not going to expect to a large extent. But first and foremost, landlords are, always punished because of the lack of ability of their local council in the first place. Now, the local council, don't have the appropriate accommodation. They are desperate to find homeless people any accommodation, let alone the correct accommodation. So they will refer their tenants to perhaps a landlord that has the appropriate accommodation. But then the next thing that happens is those tenants invite the rest of their brood, the family, into that accommodation. That's got nothing to do with the landlord, and probably got nothing to do with the council. The council probably know that that's going to happen. The landlord probably thinks, well, it's just the one person that's moving in. The next thing you know, there's a wife and three kids that's moved into a studio or whatever. And that becomes all of a sudden a landlord issue because they've allowed them to. But the truth is, they probably weren't aware that they had half a dozen people living in that property. That makes them a bad landlord. The Lambeth Council or any other council then think, okay, well, now we can go make money off this guy because we put that tenant in there. The position that landlord has got himself into is that is overcrowded. It's become antisocial. And if they're in a block and there's rows and arguments happening, they all become the fault of a landlord. And then subsequently, antisocial behavior comes into it. The reality of it is, Paul, that basically all respective councils and successive governments have not been able to build the appropriate amount of housing for all the number of people that are coming into the country or are homeless in the country. So they need to rely on private renting landlords. And then when they rely on them, they punish them by saying, oh, we've got to give you a license and you've got to pay for this and you've got to pay for that. And actually that makes things worse because then landlords start to rebel. They say, well, why should I pay that? Why would I need to do that? I'd rather kick them out. Well, you can't kick them out because the system says that there's nowhere for them to be homeless. You have to then go into a court procedure to ask for an eviction order in order for the council to go and put them back into some hotel or hostel. It's an ever revolving door of problems. And the people that are actually in the problem there are the tenants because they're being shoved from pillar to post. But the reality of it is that the councils that actually house these people in the so-called rogue landlords' properties, and I'm not saying there aren't rogue landlords, but they are made to be rogue landlords because they will let to a person or a couple, and the next thing you know, several other people move in there. And some of those people actually rent those properties, and what they do is they rent to other people to cover their actual cost. So the landlord isn't making any more money than he's supposed to because he's got an agreement, and the council comes knocking on his door to say we got to give you a license and you got to pay for it because you've got too many people living in there creating antisocial behaviour. It starts with the council.
Yeah, they say the licensing scheme will help them tackle problems head on, as well as cracking down on rogue landlords, making sure that all privately rented properties meet the standards that we demand. So it's clear that they don't have the funds to go and do this and resolve all these issues. And if you just look at some of the figures they give, around a third of the 145,000 residential dwellings in Lambeth are in a private rented sector. So that's a third of 145,000, 150,000. So that's like 50,000 properties. in the PRS, roughly speaking. And official data has shown that 9,446 of these are predicted to have serious home hazards. The council's also received over 10,000 complaints of antisocial behaviour in the last 3-year period from the private rented sector. So they've got a big problem to solve, and I guess charging landlords around £900 for a licence will go some way to help fund sorting their problems out.
Well, yes and no. £900 in the grand scheme is probably not a lot, but what they will do is they do successfully manage to piss off the landlords who will turn around and say, right, okay, well, I don't want to rent to your people. I want them out and I want to go private. So actually, they'll shoot themselves in the foot. They should probably go and talk to the landlord, not tell them they've got to charge them 900 and work together in order for that landlord to want to invest more to work with that council, not against the council. It's purely management, and absolutely poor management.
Well, we've had a bit of a landlord special this week on Property Matters. We'll be back again same time next week with another Property Matters.